Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and put this presentation on. Continue to share. Perfect. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. And for those of you who are continuing to join, we're so happy you're here. My name is Raquel. I am the Policy Associate at the California Women's Law Center. And like Yoselin mentioned, this is being recorded, and folks are highly encouraged to use the chat. I would love to invite those of you who are already here to share your name, pronouns, and where you're joining us from, if that's something you're able to do. Today's topic, the aware legal aid worker, sustaining your practice, sustaining yourself, really came from a couple spaces. To start with, I co-hosted a webinar with my colleagues in August, and some of the feedback we got in the survey was that folks were really interested in learning more about trauma and learning more about how it impacts their work in general. So there's one foundation of encouragement. But then we also, or I have personally found myself in spaces since joining the California Women's Law Center in June of 2025, where I've really been able to see the impact of trauma on folks who are carrying out this really important work. And just a quick piece of background about me, I am an associate clinical social worker with the state of California, and I am able to and have the privilege to work with people in a therapeutic space. And while today's presentation is not therapy-based and is not therapeutic, this is how my lens is informed, and this is part of what I bring to the presentation today. What I'm really interested in today is naming an occupational exposure so that you can respond earlier and sustain your work. So again, this is meant to be a skills training for sustainable advocacy and judgment. I invite everybody here to simply notice how your body and your mind react with some of the topics I present today. Some of them may be new, some of them may challenge you. All of those are good signals. And overall, I want to encourage people to take a consent-based approach here today. And that means that you're going to take what suits your role and you're going to leave what doesn't. My goal is to leave you with a simple framework that you can actually use and something that feels practical as opposed to abstract. And so another connection to why we're talking about this today is something that a lot of you may be familiar with, and that's the California Rules of Professional Conduct. And I particularly want to highlight Chapter 1, lawyer-client relationships. This isn't something that I'll go in too far into depth, as again, I'm sure most of you are familiar with this here, but I just want to point to things like competence and diligence and communication as connectors to why we're here today. And vicarious trauma may not be something that is presented in law school and part of your curriculum, but it is directly connected to your attorney ethical obligations. And so I hope we're able to make those connections today as we're going through this workshop together. So some brief learning objectives. First, I'm hoping that we define vicarious trauma and how it intersects with the legal aid experience. And then I'm hoping you can identify at least 2 signs of vicarious trauma in yourself. And lastly, I'm hoping to introduce the AWARE framework and thermometer so that you can identify needs and support along the way. And again, I really want to share that if today's content challenges any ways of thinking or practicing, or maybe it goes against something a trusted mentor once taught you, I just want to encourage that spirit of curiosity. We want to explore whether our current practices are still relevant for what we're going through today, or if they could use some updating to meet the times that we're living through collectively. Because outside of our work, we still have whole lives that are impacted by everything that's going on in general. So we're going to launch our first poll here that may be popping up on your screen momentarily. And this is just a brief question around how many times a week do you have to read or hear about traumatic events as part of your work? So we're just going to take a minute to allow that poll to generate, and hopefully folks can go ahead and answer.
Sorry, give me 1 minute for that.
Yeah, no worries. And again, really wanting folks to think about, how often do I have to read about traumatic events? Maybe you witness them in the office or as part of the work that you do. Maybe you see traumatic things in a courtroom. And really wanting to emphasize that this can apply to anybody, from somebody who is in a courtroom to somebody who's doing more paperwork related matters. if you're having to read things, that's information that you're intaking. Our brains are really, really good at drawing up pictures and connecting stories. And so over time, these things can accumulate to be stressful and to have real impact on us. So we can wait another minute or so for the poll if that's okay. And if not, we can just move to chat-based answers. I'm okay with that as well.
Sorry, I can launch it in like a minute. My poll isn't.
No, you're good. I think it just popped up. Let me see. Oh, question. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and wait for the questions. Actually, let's take a gander. Where's the poll? I think it's coming. Thanks to those of you who joined us in the chat, letting us know where you're joining from. And I see a couple of you asking where the poll is. I think we're hanging on for maybe another 30 seconds. And if not, we can just move on again and I can ask the question and we can just use the chat. I know somebody already said that they see it, they experience or witness trauma every day as part of their work. There we go. How many times a week do you read or hear about traumatic events as part of your work? Yeah, thank you so much to those of you who are answering. I appreciate it. Mm. Some of you are witness these events over 11 times a week. Wow. And simple math. I always tell people I became a social worker because I'm bad at math, but just some 5 days a week, 11 times, we then multiply that by for 4 weeks in a month, and there's a number there that's pretty high. Again, I'm not a mathematician. We have about 83% of you responding, and I think that's fantastic. Thank you so much. A large majority of you witness these events 4 to 5 times a week, which is a lot. That's a lot. Thank you so much for participating. I'm going to go ahead and continue to move forward and exit out. All right. And so I want to introduce a thought that might be different for some of you in this space, and that's that legal aid workers are caregivers. I invite folks to react with the Zoom reactions if you'd like. Welcome to put things in the chat as well. But I want to explain what I mean, right? And so when I say that legal aid workers are caregivers, I don't mean in the sense of a therapist or the IHSS worker that takes care of somebody. I mean that you show up for people in real times of need and that is a form of care. When I talk about a caregiver, I'm using a very simple definition that I want to offer folks here today. And that's that a caregiver is anyone who regularly shows up in moments of vulnerability, uses their skills to support others, and carries some of the emotional weight of what clients are going through. When I talk about giving care through a legal practice, I mean that you show up for people in crisis and high stress. You listen to stories detailing some of the hardest and most traumatizing days of people's lives. You use legal skills to mitigate harm and to seek justice, and you carry a level of responsibility in the outcomes of this pursuit of justice. Giving care through a legal practice means that you explain complex systems and options in plain language. It's not easy to do. You provide containment and a sense of safety in chaotic situations, and you absorb client fear, anger, grief, and hope. All of those indications that we're humans doing this work with other humans. And being impacted by the work is not a sign of weakness. So I want to share this screenshot here. Hopefully folks can view it. I'm going to move my bar in case that's in the way. I give folks about 20 seconds and I'm going to show the rest of the screenshot, which I will also read out loud. But just to give folks some context, this is a real social media post that I came across a couple weeks ago, really describing vicarious trauma so well, with so much care. So let me show you the rest of it. Doesn't want to do it. There we go. That's a lot of text. So I'm going to go ahead and read some of that in case it's helpful, and hopefully this sidebar isn't blocking anybody. But I'll start at the top. This week was heavy and deeply humbling. An elderly disabled woman came in seeking a restraining order against her own son. I helped her complete the paperwork, but I couldn't shake the worry about how she would manage everything on her own. Today, she returned with another son who had flown across the country to support her. I'm going to fast forward a little. That afternoon, a Mandarin speaking litigant came in with her adult daughter, who was probably around my age. I already had a professional interpreter on the phone, but her daughter chose to stay despite my encouragement that she wait outside. She ended up hearing painful, traumatic details no child should have to carry. At one point, she stepped out, and we later learned she was trying to hurt herself in the hallway. Paramedics were called. My lobby was full of sheriffs. Her mother was hysterical, and there we were trying to comfort somebody we couldn't directly communicate with in the middle of a crisis. All I could do was tell her to go home and focus on her daughter. All I could do was make my body language say, it'll be okay. And so, just in listening or reading this post, I am very curious, what comes up for you? What does this post bring up for you? I want to invite one word in the chat from anybody who is able to. What does this post bring up for you? Reading about somebody who was trying to harm themselves in the hallway, sheriffs being called, language barriers when we're trying to help. Sad and stress, scary, heartbreaking, horror. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Somebody let me know that they can't see the chat, and so I'm going to keep reading these. We're getting heartbreaking, pain, horror, crisis, heavy, powerlessness, worry, vicarious guilt. Oof. Yeah, there's a term. Thank you. Thank you so much for contributing those answers. It's a lot. And my point here is that the work that you do is real. And with that realness, I want to bring in this quote by Rachel Remen. The expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. And that's that we cannot work with other people while being people ourselves without feeling impacted, right? Especially these days when we're seeing and witnessing so much injustice, so many horrific events. There is almost no way to do this work without being affected. And I want to highlight that if you are affected, it's just a sign of your humanity, not a sign of your weakness. So, what is vicarious trauma? It's a term that gets used around also with the word secondary trauma, but there is a differentiation. And so that's why we're sticking to vicarious trauma today. But defined, vicarious trauma is the impact of you hearing and working with other people's trauma over time. It happens through empathic engagement with clients and survivors, even when the harm did not happen to you directly. And it's cumulative, right? It builds up across many cases, stories, and years of practice. And here I really want to highlight that because of the state of the world, it's almost impossible to not have the two mix, right? Our personal feelings about what's going on. And then when we're watching people be impacted directly in front of us, that makes this really, really hard. Over time, vicarious trauma can shift how you see the world, including beliefs about safety, trust, power, control, and justice. It can also change how you see yourself, your role as a lawyer or advocate, and your sense of effectiveness and hope. Overall, vicarious trauma shows up as changes in judgment, patience, memory, and how we relate to clients. When we're talking about vicarious trauma, we're really talking about how your mind and body react when you carry fear, when you carry pain, when you carry danger that it belongs to other people, but that you are integrating and witnessing day in and day out. And so eventually it integrates itself into the way you think, into the way you view the world. And calling back this screenshot, right? This is real. This is real work that you all do. And the poll itself showed that most of you here have encounters where you're witnessing trauma or listening to traumatic encounters 4 to 5 times a week. And some of you here checked off 11 plus a week. That's a lot of trauma exposure. And that brings into question, what are some of the things we've heard about how we're supposed to handle this work? In talking to attorneys, I've learned that some folks have heard myths like, if you feel impacted by client trauma, you are not cut out for this work. They've also heard things like, you should be able to leave it at the office every day. And should is a judgment statement, right? When we say should, we're telling somebody what we think they should be doing to move correctly. But this is really hard to do. And an effective lawyer detaches themselves from the work. I'd be curious how many of you have heard any of these in your experience as either an attorney or a legal aid worker. And I want to say that if this has been hard for you to do, if you haven't been able to leave it at the office, if you haven't been able to detach yourself from the work, that's not a bad thing. That's your compassion. Our feelings are not a duffel bag that we can leave in the trunk at the end of the day. So now, what do we do moving forward? Well, this is where awareness in practice really comes into play. And what do we mean by that? Before I go into it too much more, I want to introduce the topic of somatics briefly. And I want to say that somatics could be its own training. It can mean many different things. Here in particular, I want to highlight three things. First, soma, the definition being the physical body as perceived from within versus an external perspective. The goal of somatics is to encourage individuals to shift their awareness from just being a body and viewing themselves externally, almost more like a robot, to living in a body, to being the person inside of the body, the vessel that carries out the work. And what's interesting about somatics is that it highlights the way emotions are often held as sensations in the body. And so, what do we mean by sensations? This can be some of the sensations that folks are familiar with. Starting at the top, we have decreased patience, and that can be something that happens suddenly. You may suddenly find yourself without patience. You may be wondering why at the end of, a really difficult day, you go home and you're irritable, or you're snapping at folks. We have intrusive thoughts, and this is exactly what it sounds like. Thoughts that are coming into your brain space without your consent. You don't want to think about these things, right? Maybe you don't want to picture the story that a client told you 2 days ago, but you can't help it. It's intrusive. Then there's persistent feelings of hopelessness and or powerlessness. And some of you shared in the chat earlier that that screenshot brought feelings of powerlessness. And that makes sense. It was a really heavy account. Then we have hypervigilance, and that's that feeling of looking over your shoulder, not feeling like you can trust anybody or anything, and almost waiting for the other shoe to drop. A state of hypervigilance really negatively impacts our heart health, our brain health, our blood pressure. It has real effects beyond just being uncomfortable. And we have irritability, right? If you're somebody who's not usually irritable, but all of a sudden you are, there might be something going on there related to how much trauma you're witnessing at work. And then we have dissociation, and that's a term describing the ways in which people can be physically present but mentally checked out. For protective reasons, the brain kind of shuts down and decides that we are going somewhere else because we cannot handle what is happening here. One of my favorite ones to talk about is jaw tension. I'd love for some of you to check right now. How tense does your jaw feel? When's the last time you kind of loosened your jaw up a little bit? Along with jaw tension, which isn't here, is like crunchy shoulders, right? How many of us are kind of like this right now and not realizing that our shoulders are like up to our ears? A lot of stress can sit on the shoulders sometimes. And then we have the dread. The dread is what I how or a term I like to use to describe that feeling when you're sitting in the parking lot of either your office, a courtroom, some kind of client interaction, and you're like, I do not want to be here. I don't want to do this. I want to run away. The dread is also that feeling Sunday night when you're laying in bed thinking about your work day the next day. And it's not just, I don't want it to be Monday, I could use another weekend. It's that really intense feeling, really unpleasant feeling of, I do not want to do this. We have sleep disturbances, and this can go along with intrusive thoughts. But sleep disturbances can be that things like I can't fall asleep at my usual time. I'm waking up 3 to 4 times a night with intrusive thoughts. It can be needing to sleep too much. right? Wanting to spend more time than is normal for you, than is typical for you in bed. Then we have avoidance of tasks. And I know sometimes folks call themselves procrastinators or say that, I just get things done at the last minute. And that can be true for some of us. But there can also be a sense of avoidance where this case is too heavy, this case is too hard. I don't want to sit on the phone and listen to this person become emotional. And not because I'm a bad person, but because it's so heavy for me to then walk away with. And then we have unexplained aches. So folks can sometimes experience aches that don't have any rhyme or reason. Again, if we're folks with the crunchy shoulders, we may experience shoulder pain because our shoulders are up to our ears half the day and we don't really realize that. Sometimes we get unexplained headaches, chest aches, back aches, stomach aches. And so this is not an exhaustive list, but this can be some of the things that folks can be going through. And so why does this matter? It matters because, body states affect listening, memory, judgment, client relationships. It can affect um, your legal work by taking your awareness away from your work. And so, practicing somatics and becoming just aware of our feelings and the way we're reacting can really protect prep work, judgment, recall, client communication, and courtroom presence. I want to emphasize here that legal work happens in nervous systems as well as in briefs and hearings. And what I mean by that is that your body is the vessel through which you are carrying out this work. And so, if the body is in a trauma state, if you are experiencing that vicarious trauma, then your work is going to be impacted in one way or another. So, then comes the AWARE framework. The AWARE framework is something that I came up with just to try to help people understand how they can check in with themselves when the work is getting hard. And the point of this is to be practical, to be easy to adopt, because these kinds of frameworks can get very, very complicated. So let's get into it. The A in AWARE for acknowledge, acknowledging the impact of the work. And in a future slide, I'll give more details as to what some of these things can look like in action. The W for watch what is happening in your body. The A for allow space for emotion and meaning. The R for respond with grounding and boundaries. And the E for engage support and sustainable practice. Something you might notice from here through the rest of the presentation is an emphasis on community, on support, consultation, and building what I like to call a sustainability routine. This kind of work really requires us to have a system in place so that we can take care of ourselves and put on our mask before we take care of others and we rescue other people. And with that comes the AWARE thermometer. The AWARE thermometer is adapted from Terence T. Gorski. Gorski created this very in-depth thermometer that's used in the recovery world and is really successful for people who are in that space. But again, the point here is to adapt something that is easy to use, that feels practical, that you can almost print out and maybe put next to your desk and glance at it every now and then. This thermometer involves 4 levels, starting at steady, then activated, overextended, and then overloaded. And let's get into these one by one to see what it is exactly that we're describing. So in the steady range, or what we call in range, some of the things you might notice is an individual is focused. There's even breath. The individual can prioritize. You can look at your to-do list, you can look at your calendar, and you can select what needs to be done without feeling too much of that paralysis analysis that can be really debilitating. Next step here is to maintain your rhythm. Keep giving yourself what you need: water, a stretch, a break, whatever systems you have in place that are working for you, we want to keep those up. At this point, there really isn't any additional support that you need to loop in, but we really want you to keep your current supports. And so one thing that I want to say about this thermometer is that the goal is that not only do you have to focus and pay attention to when you are maybe escalating in your feelings, but we also want to notice what keeps us feeling good. Maybe this was the morning you went for a walk before work. Maybe this was the morning that you got 8 hours of sleep the night before and you can feel the difference. Maybe this is the day you ate a full breakfast before starting your first meeting, and so you came in nourished and energized. It is important to pay attention what works for us as much as we pay attention to what does not work for us. And then we move into the activated space. And this is where we're still effective. One thing I want to say about stress is that there is such thing as positive stress. Stress can sometimes drive us to get things done. It can drive us to complete things that we may feel challenged by or we may feel afraid of, but we do it anyway because there's a little bit of motivation in positive stress. But stress can turn toxic in ways that we're going to see throughout this thermometer. So if you are in the activated space, you might notice a sense of urgency that feels uncomfortable, faster speech, maybe you're talking faster, or maybe you notice that people aren't understanding you when you're speaking because you're talking too fast. That definitely happens to me. You may notice shallow breath, and this is when we're not breathing as deeply into our bellies. And I would argue that a lot of us do not breathe deeply into our bellies throughout the day. And we do what's more shallow breathing, meaning it's here at the chest and we're just kind of moving from here, as opposed to allowing the breath to fully go into our bellies and come back up. And this does take a mindful approach to breathing, which can be hard to do uh, with all the things that are going on, right? And then ultimately, you might notice ineffective multitasking. This is what I like to describe as people who start multiple tasks and then leave them undone. So now you have multiple tabs open up here, and that's going to be distracting. Even for folks who thrive in a multitasking space, it can reach an ineffective point when you're actually not getting any work done. You're just starting a bunch of it. So now you leave yourself with more things to worry about. And so if you notice you're activated, something you might do next is the 60-second reset. And I really want to encourage people to think broadly, creatively about what a 60-second reset could be. A 60-second reset could be that you get up and you walk around your office. Maybe there's a hallway you walk up and down. Maybe this is a good bathroom break. A 60-second reset can literally mean that you step away from your computer, maybe you go look at your phone or something, and you come back. But the idea here is that you do something that can sort of allow a quick mind reset and allows you to choose the next right task. So you can go through your calendar, your to-do list, whatever it is that guides your day to day, and you can make a more effective decision about what to do so you can feel more in alignment as opposed to feeling more chaotic. You might want to loop in a quick check-in with a colleague if needed. This is again where that support is going to come in. And we're going to keep talking about support, normalizing that here. Checking in with a colleague could be the person right next door to you. If you're virtual, maybe it's somebody that you can check in with on the phone, maybe somebody you can text, a Teams message. And if it's not a colleague, because for some reason that doesn't feel good for you, maybe there's another trusted person in your life that you can check in with. And a micro prompt, something to think about here. It's what's driving the urgency. Is it a system? Is it somebody in power above you who is sort of pressuring you to get something done? Is it your own expectations? Because sometimes we are the hardest critics, right? We're the ones setting the deadlines. And so it's really important to just step back and ask from that attitude of curiosity. What is driving this urgency at this moment? Then we move into overextended, which is the orange level, where stress is really in the driver's seat here. Things you might notice are that jaw tension. You may notice dread. You may notice irritability, tunnel vision, avoidance. I want to give an example on tunnel vision because that can be confusing for some folks. Tunnel vision is that space you get into sometimes where you cannot stop what you're doing, the task, the activity, until you meet some kind of goal. Whether it's I need to finish it, I need to finish half of it. That tunnel vision uh, can be negative if it stops you from taking care of yourself, if it puts you in a place where stress is driving so hard that we are neglecting the self. So this can be not eating your lunch because you haven't finished the task, not getting up from your desk because the task is undone, or denying yourself any other kind of basic need, like even going to the restroom. And this can happen sometimes because we're so hyper focused and we want to get this thing done. The next thing to do if we find that we are in this space is what I like to call boundary and grounding. And so I'm going to take a pause here and say that when I talk about boundary and grounding, it is not just in the ways that we've seen on social media, right? TikTok, Instagram have really given a rise to what I like to call the social media therapist. And everybody is throwing around words like boundaries and grounding, and everybody's narcissistic. And so I want to encourage people to kind of suspend those and think about boundaries and grounding as something that you create for yourself completely. If I continue to use the tunnel vision example, a boundary could be that you are going to get up every 70 minutes, right? You're going to set an alarm, you're going to set a timer every 75 minutes, whatever works for you. You're going to let that alarm go off and you're going to allow yourself to stop and go take care of a basic need, even if it means just standing up and stretching, which we know our bodies need, especially when we sit a lot all day. And grounding can be so many things. Grounding can be drinking water. Grounding can be eating a snack. Grounding can be looking out of a window if you have one and just taking a glance at what's happening outside. I want to encourage folks to know that this can look however you need it to look. It doesn't have to be that we're all going to be meditating. We're all going to go do yoga. We're all going to go for a hike. That's not realistic for all of us. We want you to find the boundaries and grounding that A, align with who you are, but also align with your capacity. What we don't want to do is make these tools feel like more work because they don't have to be. What you might loop in at this point is more debriefs, more support. Debriefs and support can look many different ways. For some people, a debrief is writing what we call a brain dump and just writing what's at the top of your mind. This can be you set a 45-second alarm and you're going to write or type whatever it is that's on your mind and you're going to leave it on a sheet of paper, on your notes app, wherever you need to put it. I also encourage people to consider self debriefs, such as, can you voice record yourself venting? If anybody has ever heard of the exercise of writing the letter that you're never going to send, this is like a digital version of that, right? Can you vent into your voice recording and then delete it? And for some folks, that might seem kind of funny, right? Like, why am I doing this if no one's going to look at it? There is a real science behind taking what's happening in here and finding a way to externalize it, to put it out of us in a certain way. And so that's what we're doing here. When I talk about adjusting your workload where possible, we really want to focus on our circle of control, right? Focus on the to-do list that we have control over. Is there something that can be adjusted? Can your documentation, can your task be completed tomorrow? Can you give yourself a couple hours? Can you get a break and then go back to it? And I want to, really acknowledge that for some people, they may have tasks that they don't have control over the deadline. And so where do you have control? That's what I really want to encourage. What you might consider here, the micro prompt, is what's the smallest recovery step that restores capacity? With the example of tunnel vision, one smallest recovery step that could restore capacity is physically forcing yourself to get up, drink some water, eat a snack maybe, and come back to the desk. And this doesn't have to be more than 5-10 minutes, depending on how long you want to take. The smallest recovery step could be just using the restroom because that gives you a break. It could be just looking outside the window because maybe the sun and the trees makes you feel good. This is really where we get to adapt to our needs and what suits us best. And then lastly, we have overload. And this is where recovery is really needed. You might notice that you're numb and shut down. You might notice that you're freezing. There might be intrusive worries, and you can't access your skills, right? Your executive functioning is jeopardized in this state. What you might want to do next is stop and stabilize. When we try to push through these states of mind, it almost makes it worse. It's almost guaranteed it'll make it worse. It'll either impact your mood or it'll impact something else, but it'll ultimately reflect in your behavior. And you might be able to even picture people who are constantly in this overloaded state, and it can be a little difficult to work with them. Not just because they're maybe not in the friendliest state of mind, but maybe because you can tell that their thinking and their functioning is really jeopardized here. So we want to reduce whatever is creating that stress in the moment. We want to create a quick break from it and really take care of those basic needs, right? Excuse ourselves to the restroom, take a walk if you can, go to your car for 5-10 minutes. It really depends on what's accessible to you. And we want to loop in support We want a supervisor if that's something that is a safe space for you at work. This is where an employee assistance program could really, really help. If you have somebody that you work with, like a therapist, this could be a good person to schedule a session with. And again, wanting to be inclusive here and recognize that not everybody works with a therapist and people have varying perspectives when it comes to mental health support. So plug in what feels good for you here. Maybe it's a spiritual leader, maybe it's a community leader, maybe it's a family member, an elder you go to, or even a younger family member that gives you energy and hypes you up. And when we talk about a crisis plan, we're not talking about a risk assessment the way we talk about in a clinical sense. This is more of like the crisis of your work being impacted. And so, what is it that has to happen? Does somebody need to take over a task for you? Do you need a personal day the next day in order to like get yourself back into center so you can be your best self? Really want to be creative with what it is that you need. And that's the micro prompt. What boundary protects my integrity and sustainability? Maybe the boundary is that tonight you are going to go to bed at 9:30, regardless of where your work is. And you're going to wake up early the next day and get to it. That might be something that works. But again, each of you are the experts in your own lives. And so you would know what you need in these moments. So I want to introduce some scenarios, and I recognize that folks may not have complete access to the chat. So feel free to chime in because I can see it, but I'm going to go ahead and go through some of these scenarios. So an immigration attorney has a heavy docket of clients with credible fear interviews. In 1 week, 2 clients are denied asylum and face return to life-threatening conditions. The attorney starts waking up at 3 a.m. and thinking about what they could have done differently. So the first thing I wonder is where might this person be on the thermometer by the end of the week? Let's see if I get any chat responses. I'll take a glance, and if not, we can go through it and you can answer on your side. Let's see. We got some coming through. Probably all the way up in the red. Yeah, probably, huh? Absolutely. These are really heavy things that are happening to people. And I want you to think to yourself, what signs of vicarious trauma do you notice in this scenario? What signs do we see here that somebody is being affected by what they're experiencing at work? If you said waking up at 3 a.m., that is the right answer. That is a sign of vicarious trauma. We're talking about intrusive thoughts here, sleep disturbances, and who knows how somebody operates in the daytime after having a night of sleep where they're getting up at 3 in the morning, right? That's that cumulative stress that we're talking about. And so, as a reminder, this is that red zone, right? We are having intrusive worry. We feel numb. We're freezing. This is somebody that might really want to take a pause and examine how it is that they're feeling, not just from a emotion awareness perspective, but from a perspective of how are my feelings impacting my work, if at all? They probably are. Not because we want to, but because it's just the way it works. Let's go to scenario 2. A housing advocate is covering for 2 vacancies on the team. They are in court 4 days a week and handling emergencies between hearings. When a family loses their case, they react with frustration towards the family and avoid a debrief, telling them they'll receive a call the next day with more details of what this means for them. The family is left emotional and confused. And again, the question, where might this person be on the thermometer by the end of the week? Or even at the beginning of the week. Where would they be at the beginning of the week? They might be in the orange. They're covering 2 vacancies. They're in court 4 days a week, and there's emergencies in between. That is a lot to handle. And what are the signs of vicarious trauma? If you said frustration, avoiding the debrief, you would be correct. And there's likely other things that we could notice in this individual's behavior. But these two, of course, stand out because when we're in that overextended state where stress is driving, we might have irritability. We might be avoiding our tasks. There might be a sense of dread, which might be why this attorney opted to not debrief with the family on the spot. right? Even if that was a common practice, they might have felt like, I can't do this today. So I mentioned that I would continue to expand on the AWARE acronym, and this is where I'm going to give a little bit more detail. When we talk about acknowledging what is happening, there is no story needed here. There's no shame needed either. This is not a space where we need to rationalize why we're feeling what we're feeling. And so you might say things to yourself like, I'm feeling activated. My stress is rising. This feels heavy. I'm human. And it sounds funny, right? I'm human. But sometimes we're doing this work so much that we forget that we are real people. And sometimes we've been doing this work for 20, 25, 30 years, and we think, I've never been impacted before. Why now? And so what we don't want to do is argue with those feelings. We do want to watch and witness ourselves. This means mind, body, behavior. There is a clear connection between the way we think, the way we feel, and the way we behave. Is your mind racing? Are you blanking? Are you somebody that can usually answer things right off the top of the head, but all of a sudden you find your thinking has slowed down a bit? Things to watch out for are jaw tension, shoulders up to here, sudden headaches. Maybe your behavior is now rushed or it's avoidant. And so some of the things you might say out loud to acknowledge this is, I notice my jaw is tight. I am rushing. Even acknowledging feelings like it feels like a threat is present can be really, really valuable. It allows you to bring yourself into that state of awareness as opposed to operating more robotically, where we're disconnected from what's actually happening. And we do that sometimes because we're just trying to push through. If I can just make it through the day, I'll be okay. But the thing about vicarious trauma is that it piles up one on top of the other. And so while today you may be able to do that, 3 months from now, that may not be super sustainable. So we want to allow yourself not to argue with the feeling. That might be funny to say in a room with a lot of attorneys, but this might be a space where we don't have to argue with ourselves. And if we do, can we allow a pause before the story starts? Can we take 10 seconds to just say, wow, I'm really feeling this. Wow, my chest feels heavy. My stomach, I'm nauseous now after reading this case. And you can say things like, this feeling can be here and I can still be effective. My favorite one is, I don't have to like this feeling to allow it to be present. Feelings pass. And so if we can just acknowledge them sometimes, we can create more comfortable scenarios for ourselves. And we can prevent spillover into tone, into judgment, into client interactions. And when we respond, this is where we engage our tools. We want to respond by picking one action that returns you to effectiveness, whatever that is for you, and whatever effective means for you as well. This can be a range of things. You can be somebody who likes to count your breaths. There are so many different breath count exercises. One of my favorite things to do that's really accessible, you can do it from anywhere that you're at, and people usually don't even know you're doing it, is something called progressive muscle relaxation, or PMR. Encourage folks to look that up if that's something they're unfamiliar with. Progressive muscle relaxation. It is such a great tool. You can step away from the screen for 5 minutes if that's accessible to you. You can perform a quick body scan. Body scans are another highly accessible tool. You can do them anywhere within 1 to 20 minutes, depending on how long you want to do it. And I encourage folks to look up a YouTube video or maybe tap into their favorite meditation app if that's something that they're interested in. Other quick things to do, notice that jaw clench, drop those shoulders. This is really part of developing a sustainability routine so you can sustain yourself and sustain your work. And hopefully, by you engaging some of these tools, maybe you can start modeling for others on your team, in your life, what it looks like to take care of yourself unapologetically so that you can keep being of service to others. We really want to engage the support of consultation. If vicarious trauma is an occupational hazard, then isolation really increases risk. And so hopefully it's part of your professional practice, not only to consult about cases, but about how it's feeling to work on the case. right? What emotions are coming up? What's been difficult about it? Support here, I really want to encourage is communal, right? It's how we can take care of each other. And I've been in spaces, thankfully, I've been in spaces with attorneys where, I mean, someone just started crying, rightfully so. They were describing some really hard things. And folks responded by normalizing. I feel that too. Like, hey, I get it. This sucks. And that alone can help people feel less alone, can help people feel less ashamed of being human while doing this work. So engage the supportive consultation, normalize talking to one another. Now, we're rounding out the end here. We have some key takeaways. Hopefully, you've understood that the ability to steady the nervous system and process the trauma you're witnessing is key in sustaining your practice. And again, this doesn't have to be a therapeutic approach at all. This is awareness, this is ethical practice. This is just acknowledging that you are not separate from the body that does the work, right? You are inside of the vessel, and that vessel carries out the work that you do. So it's important that you take care of it. Trauma awareness is part of ethical and professional obligations. This isn't just a self-care thing, and definitely not commercialized self-care. This is really a part of integrating your awareness into an ethical practice that allows you to have effective lawyer-client relationships. And I really want to emphasize that trauma education is ongoing. As humans, we are developing, our conditions are sometimes worsening. And so, vicarious trauma is going to be a topic that we continue to learn about and expose ourselves to, hopefully. One book that I want to recommend to people, because I know folks love to walk away with a resource, is a book by Dr. Laura van der Noot-Lipsky. She has such a long name, but she's fantastic. Her book, Trauma Stewardship, Caring for Self While Caring for Others, is really, really helpful for people who want to learn more about how to do this. She also has a really popular YouTube video that I encourage folks to listen to if vicarious trauma is something that's really interesting to you. And what the video does is she explains this really, really detailed and interesting scenario where she was considering ending her own life due to just a lot of things that she was listening to. And it was when somebody heard her say it out loud that they pointed to her and said, "Hey, I think you're going through something." And so now trauma stewardship is all that she talks about. You can find her website, her books, her videos. She's fantastic. She's a very captivating speaker. So we're again reaching the end here, and I'd love to hear from everybody or read from everybody. One word in the chat that reflects what you're taking away from this webinar, right? Maybe there's a tool you're taking away. Maybe it's just the perspective that legal aid workers are caregivers and you give care to people. So I'm going to open up my chat over here and see what I can see. Naming it. Yeah, thanks, Ari. Notice. Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah. Self-care. Thanks, Kevin. And I want to encourage not commercialized self-care, communal self-care, real self-care. The presentation has made me aware. Take the walk. Thanks, Taylor. PMR, yes, progressive muscle relaxation. I encourage everybody to look it up. People cannot tell when you're doing it. It's so simple. Awareness, intentionality, lower those shoulders, please. They do this all the time. We got to do a little bit of this. I encourage you to look around too and see how many of your colleagues or loved ones have their shoulders like up here. The power of pausing and taking breaks, be in my body, awareness, sustainability. Yeah, thank you all so much for sharing that. I really appreciate it. And so that's kind of all I got for you today. If you have any questions for me, if you'd like to follow up and say like, I don't even know where to go from here. Let's talk. If you want to know what some of my favorite apps are, I'm happy to talk about that too. Anything in general, here's our email, here's the website. And if this is a topic you'd like to continue to learn about, you'd like me to find more trauma things I can talk about, which I can, let us know. Send us an email, say so in the feedback survey, and we'd love to come back with more topics that can be helpful to you all. I'm going to go ahead and stop my share to see if maybe there's any questions I can answer. I think we have some time. We have about 10 minutes. Difference between vicarious trauma and these signals discussed here and burnout. Yeah, thanks, Hatchley. I hope I didn't mispronounce your name. Difference between vicarious trauma and these signals discussed here and burnout. Yeah, I think burnout is one of the symptoms that we see because of vicarious trauma, right? So I think a lot of the times when we're describing burnout, we are describing the impact of the trauma. Burnout can mean different things for people and look differently. And so I would say that burnout falls under the umbrella of vicarious trauma, not exclusively, but in this case, that's kind of where I would put it under. Let's see. I think there was another. Oh, I think we're using the chat. Let's go there. What are your favorite apps? One of my favorite apps to use is the Calm app. I want to say it's like 20 bucks a year, I think. And the reason I like it is because it has meditation, it has binaural beats, it has guided meditations. And I'm somebody who's on the go. So I love a meditation that I can take with me. They also do things like PMR, breathing. So I really, really love the Calm app. I know folks are also really love Headspace. And I think, I'm not sure if this is still going on, but for a while, Headspace was offering free memberships to LA County folks. And that might have been during COVID. But I know they were also offering youth some free app access. And so again, how does this information not only pertain to your work, but to your personal life as well? There really is no leaving the personal life at the door. We are the one body that's doing the work. Let's see. If you have Kaiser, Ari says if you have Kaiser insurance, you can get the free premium access to the Calm app. Yes, exactly. And I'll say one more thing. For those of us who are like, I'm not downloading another app, I hear you. YouTube, right? Just type in YouTube, breathing exercise, grounding exercise, and see what comes up. I am a huge fan of the 1 to 2 minute meditations. I sometimes don't have time for the whole thing, but at night, if you have time, a yoga nidra or a nighttime meditation is chef's kiss for the brain. How to recover from long-term burnout and vicarious trauma? Stephanie, that's a great question. It's individualized for everybody, right? It really depends on your practice. I think part of recovery is setting up that sustainability routine so that we can build skills that will keep us from coming too far into the red, right? From being so overloaded that stress is driving. And when we talk about recovery, part of that might mean processing what we've already witnessed and what we haven't let out. So again, I really want to be inclusive here. Therapy may not be your jam, and this is not a sell for that, right? What can be, though, is talking to people. You may have a religious or spiritual leader you like to connect with. There may be community leaders or community spaces that you really, really feel seen in. And so wanting to encourage you to think about those, not just to care for yourself in the work, but caring for yourself in general because it all trickles down. Yeah, somebody here said Insight Timer is another great app. Love Insight Timer. A lot of these have a free version, like Headspace, Calm, Insight Timer. They all have a free version, so you don't have to commit to the annual membership if you don't want to. Let's see. Difference between responding to vicarious trauma and activation of one's own trauma defenses at work. David, what a question. I love it. The difference between responding. I think the difference in responding is the supports that you loop in. If I'm responding to vicarious trauma at work, I may be able to loop in my supervisor or my colleague or somebody in the professional space. When it's my own trauma, I may need to talk about that with somebody where I feel more comfortable, where I feel safer being a little bit more vulnerable. Because there may be things that we don't want to let a coworker know, and we want to respect our boundaries in that sense. But what I really like about this question is the way you're bringing in the fact that work can activate your own trauma. And that's going to happen quite a bit. In the social work world, we call that countertransference. And a big part of the graduate program is just teaching students that that happens to them and that it will continue to happen to them for the rest of their lives as long as they practice social work. And so I want to use that word here, right? Countertransference. That is when we are activated by what we're witnessing in somebody else, but it's our own things that are being brought up. And I would venture to say that most of you joined this work because you care. because you want to do something good, or maybe you want to right a wrong that you've witnessed or experienced in your own life. So if you are activated by the work, you're probably in the right space. What I would recommend though is setting up those boundaries, that grounding with yourself so that you are not overextended and too far into the red. Yeah. Thank you all so much for such wonderful questions. I want to continue to leave my email open if there's anything else that I can answer. If there's any other topics you want to know about, please let us know in the survey feedback. We definitely are reading those in and we're taking them seriously. So thank you in advance to all of you who will complete it. Thanks to the like 77 of you that were here today, affirming to each other that this is important and that you care. Care is underrated. Care is really underrated. So I'm glad you care. I'm glad you're here, and I hope that you can all keep like moving forward in your work. We need you to keep doing it. It's so important. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Jocelyn, is there anything we want